Hello and thank you for watching the Angry Rooster Creations channel. Today I have another fountain pen related video. This here on the table is a pen that I have not seen in any videos, and I really haven't seen it listed almost anywhere except for the random AliExpress page that I happened to stumble upon, or listing that I happened to stumble upon that had this pen for sale. This is a Hero 367 fountain pen. Now, the listing that I bought this from has it listed as Hero 367 fountain pen EF 0.038mm iridium fine tip macaron colored calligraphy pen, school, office, art supplies, Korean stationery. That is a mouthful, but if you want to try and find this pen, you'll probably have to almost type that entire word salad into the search bar, because sometimes searching, even if you type in the exact model number of a pen on AliExpress, it shows you things adjacent to that without actually showing you what you're trying to find. I don't know exactly how their search algorithm works, but it's kind of annoying sometimes. So that is the actual name of the listing. And here, if I can even find the name of the store, by Fine Draw Store. That's the name of the store. So, anyways, what we have here with this pen is a sort of transformative Lamy Safari-like pen. I'm kind of on the fence, and in the video name and title, I might call this a Safari clone. It's not a true Safari clone in the fact that it doesn't copy the form factor, like something like this Jinhao 619/777. I'll bring that pen up later for other comparisons. But the actual functional bits in this pen are very much Lamy Safari, and a lot of the design details of the Lamy Safari are here. They're just done differently. And frankly, I think they are done better than a lot of the straight Lamy clones that you'll find. I haven't tried all of them, but well, some of them I've tried, and let's just say liberties were taken that shouldn't have been taken when attempting to copy the form factor of the Safari that compromise the overall quality of a pen like that. And so far, from what I've seen from this pen, those corners weren't cut. Things were just done differently that led to a different style that I think, just by initial inspection, might lend itself to a better pen overall. Now, before I get the actual pen out and start talking about it, I do want to kind of show this package here. Most of my videos, I haven't really talked too much about packaging, just because most of the time when you get a pen from China off of AliExpress, it can be different. Sometimes I think Pen BBS comes with boxes, and I think some of the, maybe the Asvine pens come with boxes. Some of the Wing Sungs come with like a copy of the cardboard Lamy Safari box with the little slotted windows. And then sometimes the Hongdian pens come in these little metal tins like this. But anyways, the reason I have this sitting here is because I thought this pen was going to just come in a cellophane sleeve and bubble wrap like every other pen that I've gotten so far, like most of my pens. Because there was no picture in the listing that showed anything or mentioned that there was going to be a box with this pen. But this actually comes with a rather nice box. Got this little snap closure inside of the pen, and you have that foam. The little foam cutout, and that white there is that label card in the back. So anyways, enough of that. Let's get to the actual pen itself. So this pen, as you can see, from the top, you can sort of see maybe a design similarity to an extent for the, for a Lamy Safari, or, you can see where the inspiration came from and some of the design features of this pen. It has that wire clip. It has the telltale ink window. But you can also tell just by looking at it that it's not a straight up Safari clone. If you look at the cross section of the body here, It's a square cross-section. It's not like a full sharp-edged square. It's got rounded corners. It's got sort of rounded, almost parabolic type of edges that morph into a round barrel where it meets the section. So it doesn't necessarily have the characteristic Lamy flats. Same thing on the cap here. You have a square section, cross-section at the end of the cap with that cap finial that shows the Hero logo, which sort of comes around and has this center ridge that is actually independent of the clip spring. So if I spring this clip, you can see that's not any way tied into that. That's just a standalone part of the cap. And that also goes into from square to round, where it meets the at the end of the cap, where it actually meets up to the section. Now, if I take the cap off, if you look at this section here, it is that very distinct safari-esque, or in this case, maybe even more accurately, like a Lamy All-Star, in that this is a transparent section here. But it's got that very, very characteristic Lamy grip shape to it. And you'll see this nib. Now, like I said in that listing, it's deliberately, or not deliberately, it is specifically listed as a 0.38 millimeter extra fine, which it is. Now, I will note this. This has that sort of rainbow anodized nib here. In the listing on the picture, it just showed a silver nib. I was kind of surprised when I opened this up, and I was like, oh, hey, look, it's got an anodized nib. Now, but as you can see, it is very much that grip section here is clearly a Lamy style of grip section. Now, you will notice that it is different where it meets the barrel. So you don't have that traditional sort of plastic ring here that you get on, say, your Safari, where this Safari grip section meets the barrel. And this one is an actual Lamy. You know, so that's missing. And also, it is transparent here. So that transparent section where it shows the, you can actually see where the converter here seats onto, into the section. So when the cap is on, that part of that transparent grip section also acts sort of as an ink window. So you kind of get a redundancy in the ink window here. You can look there and see ink, and you can also look in here and see that it's still got ink flowing. Now, this does have a cartridge converter. Now, in the listing, let me see if I can read this. Where is it at? There it is. Rotary suction ink system. The rotary suction ink system provides a consistent flow, making it ideal for long writing sections. Based on that, I was thinking that this probably was going to come with a piston-style converter. And the reason I was kind of hoping that would be the case is most of the Hero pens I've seen listed, of whatever type, always come with those squeeze-type aerometric converters. Well, thankfully, this one does come with a rotary converter. Now, I'm going to have to say something about this. When I was looking at this, I looked up inside of the barrel here, and I don't know if this is going to show. Can I get it to show? I don't think I'm going to be able to get it to show with the desk lights here. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can get a flashlight to look down in there. See if I can. All right. Yeah. Come on now. There we go. You see those little fins down in there in that barrel? Those are also in a Lamy Safari. Now, what those are for in the Lamy Safari is if you take the Lamy cartridge, hold on one second. If you take a Lamy cartridge, this is a Lamy cartridge. It is one of the ones that came with one of my Lamy pens. I don't remember which one because both of them I bought converters for because I use bottle ink. But in a Lamy cartridge, when you take the the barrel off your Safari. If you place this cartridge into the pen, but you do not seat it fully, so it does not pierce the cartridge, and then you go and put your barrel on and start to thread the barrel, those fins, which are also you can see them very clearly inside the Safari, are meant to catch that sort of long tang shape here, so that you just place the converter in the pen without pushing it and seating it. You start to thread the barrel on, and it will actually grab this and push it the rest of the way to pierce the converter and seat it in the pen. When I saw that, I was like, hey, I wonder, is this pen actually going to be compatible with a Lamy cartridge? I was actually kind of hoping it was, because if it was, I was going to put this cartridge in here, and when I get to the writing test, use that cartridge. But I took a pair of dial calipers and I measured the opening on this converter. This is about 130 thousandths diameter. The Lamy here is about 118 thousandths diameter. 130 thousandths converts over to about 3.4 millimeters. So this is a 3.4 millimeter Chinese standard converter. So it will work with Chinese standard cartridges. Now, the Chinese standard cartridges don't have this tang. At least I haven't seen any that do. They always have a flat back. So I kind of think that maybe that's just something that when they designed this pen, they saw those in the Lamy and maybe didn't understand exactly why they were there and added them to this pen. But because it won't actually take Lamy cartridges, I don't see that those really serve a functional purpose inside the barrel. Now, on the talk about this barrel, in the video I did on my Jinhao 777/619, I mentioned that when you tighten up the barrel onto the section here, the flats on the barrel and the ink windows did not line up with the grip sections, sometimes to an egregious degree on a few of these pens. Like, for instance, this pen. Yeah, you can see that. That barrel section is like that, not lined up, and it's kind of an eyesore, so to speak. Doesn't functionally affect the pen itself, but it doesn't look good. Well, on this pen, it has a double start thread here, which causes this barrel to when you're screwing these parts together, it causes the parts to advance twice as fast. So the parts come together faster with less degrees of rotation, which means that if the threads, the start and stop points of those threads are a little bit off, you'll have a better chance of the parts lining up with that double start thread, kind of like how they do on a Safari. Well, I can tell you that I've only got one example of this pen, but with this one, that ink window pretty much almost perfectly lines up with the top of that grip section and those little cutouts and the grip section there for the window. So that is already an improvement over the other Lamy sort of style pen that I reviewed previously. Now, as far as this nib, now I did have a little bit of an issue. I finally did get this nib off. So it has the Lamy style nib here. And I did get that nib off, and I thought, hey, it's going to possibly be compatible with a Lamy nib. So this is an actual extra fine Lamy nib that I pulled out of one of my Safaris to test for this purpose. And it does fit on here, but I got to tell you, there's a bit of an issue. And I don't know if this is going to show on camera. Come on, let's see if I can get that to show. Oh, yeah, you can see that. You see that little bit of an air gap there? That line between the feed and the nib? Yeah, the Lamy nib will fit on this pen, but I do not think it will flow ink properly, because that feed, that nib and feed, like, see, here's the factory nib. There's no air gap there. That would likely cause flow issues. So based on that, I'm not going to say that, even though, yes, you can get a Lamy nib to go on this feed, because with mine that there's an air gap there between the nib itself and the feed, I am not going to go out of my way and say that this will actually function with a Lamy nib, because I know with the nib I have, that will not write well. It won't write well at all. Now, the last thing I would like to mention here is I tried and tried and tried to get the feed out of this pen. I really did. And I should have looked harder at this transparent grip section, and I could see why I was not able to get this feed out. I don't know how well it's going to show up. Do you see that right there? See that little kind of shiny spot? And you see that little shiny spot right there? That appears to be an adhesive. And this feed is actually got 2 little dabs of glue that were put on it before it was assembled into the section. So unfortunately, with these pens, you cannot remove the feed, which will complicate things when you go to clean the pen. And moreover, I was hoping I would get to do that because, I don't know how well this is going to show. If you look at this feed here, come on, focus. If you look at this feed here, if I can get it to focus, come on, camera. You see that kind of little rectangle, you see the feed channels towards the tip of that feed, and they come back to this sort of rectangular shape. It might be hard for me to show that on camera, but that's actually a secondary piece. So if you've ever watched any videos on a Lamy Safari, I think Doodlebud did a really good video where he completely tears down a Lamy Safari, and he shows that a Lamy Safari has a 2-piece feed. I wanted to get this feed out of this pen just to see, because I think this is almost a direct one-for-one copy of a Safari feed. Now, the Jinhao pen that I showed earlier does not have a 2-piece feed. It has a more conventional style of air interchange from a more typical feed, typical to some of the other Jinhao pens. But that's not how Lamy feeds are made. This looks, because, and you can kind of see, well, I don't think it's going to show up on camera, but looking through the feed, I can see, looking through that transparent section, that this does have very similar to the Lamy 2-piece style of feed. And so I really wanted to get this feed out, but since sadly it appears to be glued in, I can't dissect it further, or I risk actually destroying the feed. I did sort of gall up some bits of the feed when I was trying to get it out earlier and decided to stop because I didn't want to destroy it to the point that I couldn't actually use the pen. Now, one thing else I do want to kind of note, which is why I'm sort of surprised that the actual Lamy nib, that the Lamy nib doesn't fit properly, is there is a slight, if you actually kind of put these side by side here, well, that nib has sort of a bit of a downward angle coming out from the section. A Lamy Safari sort of has a bit of a downward angle that comes out of the section, but not quite as extreme, I don't think, as this one. I think this one droops more, and I think that may be why the feed and nib maybe don't mismatch. And this one, that curve might actually be partially in the nib itself to follow that feed. I don't know if that's going to show. Come on. And the reason I bring that up is on the... I'm going to grab a different Jinhao pen here because that one, that blue one I keep showing, has kind of leaky. It's more straight. In fact, if you actually look at the shape of that nib, it almost has a kind of a back curve to it. So all three of the pens have technically slightly different angles to the nib and feed. Now, I do know that a lot of people actually on these sort of Jinhaos with the Lamy style nibs do actually swap Safari or, Lamy nibs onto those pens. But at least with this pen here, due to that sort of droop in the feed, I don't think a Lamy nib would flow ink if put on this pen. Now, that's pretty much summed up the construction of the pen itself here. I do want to talk a little bit more about the cap. When I looked at this cap, the first thing I did, and this is actually the first thing I did when I opened this pen, was to look down inside the cap. And I'm going to see if I can get a light on this. Again. Alright. To see if it had the cardinal sin of the Jinhao, and it does not. Glad to report there is no screw down inside of this pen. You can see down in the cap liner, and there's sort of that grayish plug. That grayish plug is the tail end of this finial. So kind of more like an actual Safari, where you have this finial plug that punches through and clips into the cap liner here, which is not how the Jinhao decided to copy this. I showed this in my other video, but on the Jinhao, you actually have a steel screw up in here that on 4 of the 5 pens that I have rusted and also caused cap seal issues where these pens were very bad about drying out within a matter of days. Here you have a cap that actually is functionally very similar to how a Safari cap and cap liner are constructed. So like I said, being as how this feed, I couldn't, like I said, fully dissect it, but being as how this feed is much closer to an actual Safari, the cap is designed much more like an actual Safari, and some of the other fit and finish features on here are, I would say, closer to an actual Safari. As far as the functionality of this pen goes, I personally think it's a better Safari clone than these Jinhaos that I got, even though it doesn't necessarily look exactly like one. Now, one last thing before I move on to inking this pen up and actually writing with it is I will mention about the surface finish here. This has a sort of matte, I don't know how well it's going to show, but it has a, you can tell, I think, that it's not glossy. It has a matte surface finish. It's not really textured. It's just a matte finish. And another thing I would like to say about that is the seam lines, I don't think these are even going to show, but there's a seam line here and a seam line there for where the, 180 degrees apart from each other. The same on the cap. From where the two molds came together where this was injection molded, but there's no serious flashing. I can see it a little bit, but I cannot hang my fingernail on that. You can't really feel it. If you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't even really be able to tell that it had a mold line on it. Whereas on these, you should be able to hear that. I don't know if you'll see the mold line. Probably not. Don't think my camera's going to pick that up, but you can hear. You can feel it, and you can hang a fingernail on it on both sides. So, all in all, the fit and finish is superior on this compared to the Jinhaos that I have. The big issue with the cap has been fixed, because that screw in the cap was a big issue. Oh, and the other issue that you don't have here is, unlike on these Jinhao pens that I showed in my video, the converter head, the piston head on the converter, bottoms out here, and actually when you go to screw the converter all the way down, you can see where this one bottoms out. The actual extension of the section that goes up inside the converter does not extend into the converter here. So when I seat this piston down all the way, it does not push on that and unseat the piston and loosen it from the pin like it did on these Jinhaos, which was one of the other serious design flaws. So altogether, and this is not loose at all. This is pretty tight in here, this converter. And also, around here in the section, the plastic here is much thicker surrounding this converter than it was on these Jinhao pens. So all together, like I said, on my initial impression looking over it, the quality of construction is much better here than these guys. So like I said, even though it is a sort of transformative derivative from a Safari design, as far as functionally and the execution of it and the fit and finish, I believe this is actually a superior, Safari clone. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get on to inking this pen up. And then we're going to go ahead and try out this nib and see how she feels. I can just tell you by feeling it with my finger, I don't expect this to be too scratchy or anything because I don't really necessarily feel it hanging too much on the just from initial feel. Of course, that I'll have to tell when I start to write with it. But yeah, I'm going to stop the video real quick, ink this up, and we'll get on to actually doing some writing with it. Okay, so now we're back. I have inked this up. I inked this up with a sample that I got from Goulet Pens. This was a random ink sample that I got with an order once. This is Monteverde Sapphire. I've kind of used this in one pen one time because I was doing some experiments with doing some work on a nib, and I needed an ink to fill in that pen, and I was probably going to dump it out, and so I put this in there once before. So I've used this just a little bit, but not a lot. But before I get on to that, I realized that I did not mention something, and that was postability. This pen posts, it posts just fine. Doesn't really backweight the pen. In fact, it is very similar to a posted Lamy Safari. Now, which is another thing I didn't mention in terms of the sizes of these pens. Posted, the pen is like 3/16 of an inch shorter than a Safari. Part of that has to do with, as I mentioned before, this pen doesn't have that little kind of ring there between the section and the barrel. The cap is slightly shorter on this pen than the Safari, but when you line these two up, they're practically identical in length. And when you line the two pens up tip to tip, they're practically identical in length, but because the barrel, the section here is just a hair shorter where the cap meets, and the cap's a little shorter, when you post them, it's slightly shorter than a Safari, but the actual weight of this pen, the weight difference between this and a Safari are negligible. The diameters of the barrels, I believe right here at the fattest point, the diameter of the barrel is slightly thicker, but the cap diameters on the rounded portions are practically the same. The weights on these pens are practically the same. The balance on these pens, unposted, right there about the ink window, almost directly in the center of the pen. Right now. Pretty much directly in the center of the pen. Like, in the hand, they feel so much alike that it's almost not really worth mentioning the differences. And obviously, because this pen is the same length as a Safari, if you can write with a Safari unposted, you can write with this unposted. And that length's about, if I remember correctly, about 5 1/16 or just a hair over that, just under 5 1/8 on the length of a Safari unposted. So, as far as the actual feel in the hand and all, they're very, very similar. Now, where this one, the cap meets, because it is a slightly different design, there's a little bit of a step. It is a very minimal step. Very minimal step. Not an issue. And also the way you're generally going to hold this pen, due to it having that Safari light grip section, you're not really going to be back here on the step anyways. So, anyways, that's comparing the pens. Now, this here is just a scrap of some copy paper that I cut off of something, I think, for water tests. So this is 20-pound copy paper. Nothing crazy. So, oh, great. I left this pen unkept after talking about it. For full disclosure, I reshot this writing test because I forgot to mention the length of the pens, And I was talking for quite a while with this pen uncapped, so the reason it's hard starting now is that. There we go. So anyways, this is a Hero 367 with an extra fine nib. All right. So let's do some regular writing there. So those vertical strokes, I'm not putting any pressure. For these horizontal strokes, I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on the pen. I'm not trying to flex it, but just seeing if I can coax a little bit more line variation. It does thicken up a bit, not a whole lot. It gets wetter. That is one thing I will say. This isn't... Yeah, if I go super duper fast, I can outrun the feed. It does seem to be a little bit on the drier side, not so dry that it's bad, but it's, you know, it's an extra fine. Extra fines tend to be dry in general. And if I do kind of the little S-wiggle thing, I'm not really getting any difference in line weight with the change there. And this pen does reverse write actually quite well. Even though, like I said, this isn't necessarily the wettest pen in the world, it's not actually drying out as I reverse write. That's actually something my Safari does. If I reverse write for too long, it will eventually dry out, and then you'll have to turn over and write normal before you can use the reverse it again. Since I draw a lot with my pens, I do a lot of reverse writing or reverse drawing to get small, fine details. So, and then, of course, this is absorbent 20-pound copy paper, but even still, can get that. Oh, well, I scratched. Okay. Yeah, so trying to get this to scrub and smear. This is copy paper, like I said. It's pretty absorbent. But, and also with this not being a particularly wet flowing pen, it doesn't lay down a lot of ink in that scrub. So before I kind of finish this out, I am going to, like I said, I was doing a bunch of talking a minute ago, so I'll let both of these pens kind of dry out with caps off. All right, I'm just going to put a couple scratches on there with the Safari to kind of show the line weight. So that's an extra fine Safari nib on the black there, and that blue is the 367. It's pretty much almost the same. In fact, earlier before I reshot this, I did writing with both pens kind of side by side. I'm not going to necessarily do it again because it wasn't to show the differences in writing. It was for me to feel. These two nibs feel pretty much the same. Okay, they're both extra fine, so they have quite a bit of feedback. Neither one of them are scratchy. Now, I do think with my Safari, I can actually coax a little bit more. Well, like I said, left the nib or the cap off along earlier. Yeah, I can coax a little bit, maybe a little bit more line variation, a thicker line with pressure in my Safari than with this nib, with the nib in this 367 here. You can see these like little squiggles here. That's all of the reverse writing, so you can see the change in line weight. And like I said, I was surprised at this just keeping up. Now, obviously, some of that's going to be dependent on also the ink that you're using. I don't necessarily have a lot of experience with this ink, obviously, because I just used it straight out of that sample, but at least with this particular ink, this Monteverde Sapphire, it flows pretty good in reverse. Just like I said, it's not dumping a lot of ink on the paper. So the fact that it's a little bit, maybe I would consider this to be a bit on the dry side with how it writes, but it still is able to reverse write that well, it's kind of surprising to me. So I don't have any issues with the way this writes and works. I think, it is an extra fine. But on that listing, like I said, I can only find one listing with this pen, and it's only offered in an extra fine. But as far as you know, this pen that I have, I've only got one sample of this pen, but with this one that I have, I think that's a perfectly usable nib. I think unless you're somebody that really doesn't like extra fines, then clearly this wouldn't be a pen for you because you've only got the one option, at least that I could find. But if you're somebody that doesn't have an issue with a Western, not a Japanese, but a Western extra fine, you probably would have no issue with this pen, at least based on the example that I have. Now, as far as my overall final thoughts on this pen, I think that if you're in the market for something, a Lamy style of pen, okay, you don't want to go spend the 36 bucks that you're going to spend when you spend 29 bucks on your Safari and then $7 more on a converter for a total $36. This pen right now in that listing that I mentioned off of the AliExpress is $5.99, or excuse me, scratch that, $4.99. It's about $5. And none of the Hero pens that I've seen are available with the free shipping over $10 situation. They're all, you have to pay individual shipping on the Hero pens, and that's for like the 616s, 329s, etc., like every single one of them, including this one. So when you add that shipping in there, you know, you're at $6.50. Obviously, some things are happening right now as far as global trade and whatnot. So when you order stuff on AliExpress, you get to pay a tax. So that's going to go up or go down depending on how things go. And, you know, it's still to be seen how all that stuff shakes out in the long term. So definitely the price on these is subject to change. But at the time that I bought them, $6.50. Now let's bring in the pen that I've covered before, 619 Prix 777 Jinhao. When I bought these, probably around 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, something like that, 5 pens for 10 bucks, $2 a piece. Based on the fit and finish of this pen, what I can already tell is a far superior cap design that clips more securely, that definitely, due to the construction here, already has a better seal, has a better potential for a cap seal. It doesn't have a fastener that can rust up in here. And the fact that this converter does not unseat itself when you go to fill it and you run that piston all the way down to the bottom. And, well, just to be frank, between the two converters in these pens, the quality construction on this converter is better. Now, Jinhao does make other pens that have a converter more similar to what's in this Hero here, with the actual metal band on the converter. And oh yeah, I forgot, this is the pen that leaks, so I probably just got more ink on my fingers. That's just great. Anyways, so you know, you don't have the cosmetic issues of your ink window / flats on the barrel not lining up with the section, because this has the double start thread here that, you know, advances the barrel twice as fast. So, and it has a feed that is more similar to an actual Safari feed rather than the feed that's in these pens. Now, I mean, so you saw how this flowed. The nib is not scratchy or anything of that nature. Now, I will have to ding this pen on the fact that the feed here is glued into the pen. That is a downside. That being said, I think it's also the case with these. Because if you've had one of these, or if you've had even a Jinhao 80, it is nigh to impossible to get the feeds out of those pens. But since you can't actually see into the pen itself, it's hard to confirm whether or not it is actually glued like you can with this pen. Now, when I originally bought these pens, I bought them to test out ink samples. So I got these bonus ink samples that were just random, but I got some ink samples that I deliberately ordered certain inks. And that's why I wanted more pens so I could fill up a bunch of pens and kind of compare ink side by side without having to fill, empty, the same few pens that I had at the time. So I wanted to buy, more pens. That's the main reason I bought these pens, before I understood the issues that these pens had with the poor cap seals and everything. And some of the inks that I tried in these pens were diatramentis document inks, which are pigmented. And not only did I find out at the same time that these did not seal well and would begin to dry out within less than a week, I also found out why a pen that is hard to disassemble and take the nib out and take the feed out of, is not a pen that you want to put a pigmented ink in. So there is one of these pens. It's an orange pen that had one of the diatramentis document red inks. I can't remember if it was dark red or regular red. I pretty much, trying to get that pen clean and get the feed out of it, more or less destroyed that pen. And I actually, to even get the feed out of the pen, I had to put pliers on the thing and pull it. Which is about to the point I would have had to have been to get the feed out of this. Which leads me to believe, and it's not just these, I've tried to disassemble a Jinhao 80 that I also have around here before. I did not put a pigmented ink in that. But it's also very equally difficult to try and get the feed out. So I believe this feed being glued in here is also a commonality with these pens. So that's something to consider. Now, what would I say about that, or what do I say about that, or think, is that I would avoid putting inks in a pen like this, where you're not going to maybe be able to get the feed out to fully clean it. I would avoid putting an ink in here that is hard to clean. So if it's pigmented, or if it's an ink that's prone to staining, or say it's one of the Noodler's base stain inks that are sort of basic and they can congeal and gellify and they stain, if mixed with other inks, I would avoid inks like that in a pen like this. I would put something in this that I knew I could easily clean and flush out of the pen. And maybe kind of the same way with pens that have hooded nibs that the hoods are glued on. Consider always filling the pen with the same ink, so you don't have to worry about cross-contamination or any kind of funky stuff happening. But like I said, any inks that are known to be notoriously hard to clean, I would not put in a pen like this. So the ink that's in here, I know for a fact, because I just did a little bit of writing, like I said, when I was doing some nib testing with a different pen. I know this is a water-soluble ink. This is not a waterproof permanent ink. You can wash this pretty easily, so I know I can take my little flush bulb and flush this thing out. And as far as this, you not being able to disassemble that, I would like to show this here. This is a Platinum Preppy. I think most people would know what a Platinum Preppy is. Now, while you can take the feed out of a Preppy, the feed is just a little stem that has essentially the ink channels that go all the way to the converter. You cannot remove the air interchange from your Platinum Preppy. So you can never 100% clean a Preppy either. Okay? So if that wouldn't stop you from buying or using a Preppy, which frankly, if you just buy the pen, is also $6, but you don't get a converter, and that Platinum converter costs more than the Preppy. Just throwing that out there. I wouldn't let it detract me necessarily from buying this. Just be aware that you can only get so thorough with cleaning a pen like this. Okay? Now, having said all of those things, from my initial use of this and playing around with it, I think it's a pretty good pen. I certainly think it's worth the $6. Now, like I said, the way things are changing right now, as far as global trade and whatnot, I don't know how long it'll be that you'll be able to get this for $6.50. You might even not be able to get it for $6.50 right now. I'm not entirely sure. So if that happens and the price of this pen goes up more, would it still be worth it? I don't know. As far as even if you were to double the price of this pen, $12. converter and all, that's going to cost you close to 15, 16 bucks for a preppy. I don't know if this would necessarily be my first choice, but I think you would still get your money's worth out of it even then. Now, if it got much more than that, or even once you start getting to 12 bucks, the cost savings from the original starting to look a little bit, maybe not as advantageous, so to speak. So, like I said, that all depends just on kind of how things go here going forward. If these kinds of pens get to be more exorbitantly expensive as time goes on, I don't think they'll get exorbitantly expensive, but it might come to the point where the cost of pens like this will raise enough that you'll start to really question whether the savings is worth it to just not go ahead and buy the original. But as it was at the time of purchasing this pen, it's definitely still a budget option, and I would consider it. And really, the one thing that if they would fix, if that feed was just not glued into the section, then it would be a 100% no-brainer, all day, every day, if you could easily remove that feed. Now, perhaps if I maybe had another one of these pens, and I had bought maybe 2 of these, I would have been a little bit more risky, and I may would have tried some things to see if I could release that glue. But I got to a point where if I would have continued to try and remove that feed, like I said, I probably would have destroyed the functionality of this pen, and that would defeat the whole purpose of buying it in the first place. So I wasn't that adventurous. But with having all that been said, I hope I tried to cover as much, talk about as much, compare as much, to kind of give you an idea of maybe whether or not, whoever may be watching this, whether you would want to take make that leap and purchase one of these for yourselves and check it out. Like I said, I certain for the $6.50 I spent, I'm happy with it. I'm certainly a lot happier than I was with these. But having all that been said, if you've watched this all the way to the end, I know this has gone pretty long. I probably have a little bit of an issue with rambling about these things in these videos and stretching them out longer than maybe they should be. But if you watched this whole video to this point and you got something out of this, you were informed by it, and you enjoyed your time here, I would definitely appreciate a thumbs up down there. That would really help me out. And if you have any questions about this pen, or questions about the way I did things, presented things, talked about things, maybe you have some critiques, or you have comments, maybe somebody else out there beside me actually has one of these and say, hey, I've used that, this has been my experience, drop it down there in the comment section. At this point in time, I don't get a whole lot of comments, so I usually try to reply back to just about every comment I get. And also, anybody else watching this video, if you can add any of your own experience with one of these pens, it might help them out who would venture down there into the comment section. And like I say in most of my videos too, if you've watched this video, maybe you've watched some of my others, and you like what you see, you like the way I try to present my content, you think I'm doing a decent job, or maybe you've watched several of them and think I've gotten better or worse, hopefully not, and you want to see more videos like this, then I would definitely appreciate a subscription. That would also help me out. So with having all that been said, I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye.